Well, a very hearty good evening to all of you on this very cold day here in New York City. And I'm very happy to welcome you here. My name is William Roca. I'm the Director of Programs at Village Preservation. And this evening is our final program, our 81st program this year in 2024. So you will not be joining us for another program until next year. So we're very happy for you to join us on this presentation, A Mile South of Washington Square with Mary Brown. But before I introduce our speaker this evening, if you are unfamiliar with village preservation, and I think most of you are, but for those of you, if this is your first program with village preservation, we were founded back in 1980, and we work to document, celebrate, and preserve the special architectural, cultural, and historic heritage of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo. We've secured landmark designation for more than 1,250 buildings. And as I mentioned, this is our 81st program, but we do 75 plus free programs throughout the year. Now, we are a members-based organization, so your support is critical to help us continue the work that we do. That's why I asked that you take your phone, scan that QR code there that you see on your screen. That will take you to signing up to be a member. There are various membership levels. 1 year membership for individuals starts at $50. One of the benefits of becoming a member is you get first dibs to sign up for our programs. We do a variety of online and in-person programs throughout the year, but also just take an opportunity, explore the Village Preservation website, villagepreservation.org, learn a little bit more about the advocacy work that we do and some of the great resources that are free to you, for you to use, whether you're a member or not, including a great series of virtual maps that will help you learn more about the people and buildings in these neighborhoods. We recently released a map for 200 years of Fifth Avenue, and we actually just had a presentation on that yesterday evening. Now, we're on Zoom, so just to some quick protocols, no video and no sound for you in the audience, but we definitely want you to interact. So throughout Mary's presentation this evening, if you think of a question, please pop that either into the chat or into the Q&A feature, and we'll be asking those questions then on the last portion of this evening's program. And I also just want to briefly mention this evening's program is in part our celebration of the South Village, which Village Preservation worked really, really hard to get included in the designation. And December is officially South Village Month, so we try to do South Village theme programs in December. But now it is my great pleasure to introduce Mary Brown. She first spoke with us here in Village Preservation back in the spring of 2005. She works as an archivist at the Center for Migration Studies, a mission of the Scalabrini Fathers, who are also active in the village at Our Lady of Pompeii Parish. She teaches writing and U.S. history as an adjunct professor at Marymount Manhattan College. She received her doctorate from Columbia University in 1986, and her dissertation was on Italian Catholic immigrants in the Archdiocese of New York. She's also authored Village Preservation's Commission Report and Study, The Italians of the South Village, and I'll share the link to that report as well. But Mary, I'm going to hand it over to you. A very warm welcome to you. I'm going to disappear in the shadows, but I'm here if you need me.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody, and greetings. And now I'm going to disappear too because I got to share my screen so we can start with the pictures. Okay, share screen. Okay, PowerPoint show, I hope. Is that going to work? Share? Okay, beautiful. Oh, wow. Okay, let's start with that. I've been here before, and most recently, I gave a talk on William Harris. Some of you may remember that on something that was really totally different on theater history in Greenwich Village. But today, we're moving 4,576.92 feet south as the crow flies, according to Google Maps, to 113 Baxter Street, one block between Canal and on the block between Canal and Hester Streets, to the Church of Most Precious Blood, which you can see on the side of the picture there. I know, okay, supposed to move forward. Come on, little guy, move forward. Screen sharing paused. Hold on a sec. Let's see if we can do that again. Try it this time. Share this one. Okay, here we go. Let's see here. Push this along. Let's see if we can do this. Okay, slideshow. Slideshow from current slide. Okay, push this one from slideshow from current slide. Slideshow from current slide. Come on, honey.
I can open it up on my end and then I can run the presentation
All
for
right,
you.
why don't we do that? I'm not I'd rather move things along than try to figure out why they're not working. So yeah, this is not the time to figure out why things are not working. Can you take over now, or do I have to do something?
No, just 1 second. You can stop sharing and let me just pull it up.
Okay, stop sharing. And can you?
Oh, wait a minute.
Sorry about this. It's probably something fairly simple.
Well, PowerPoint has been a bit of a pain in the butt recently. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Just one more second. My computer's
Well, this part of it actually didn't have a picture. So while we're fooling around with the PowerPoint, I'll just say that I do know, because I've been in the audience as well as giving talks. So I know how engaged and knowledgeable people are here. And I did want to do this presentation when Mr. Roca asked about giving a presentation. I did want to do this topic because it's sort of a new topic for me. This particular parish is a sort of new topic for me. And there are two ideas in particular I want to end with, one of them for historians and one of them for sort of general for community activists. Okay, do I press buttons or do you?
Just tell me next and I'll
All right, next. Let's next. And that's our outline. I'll talk about the founding of Most Precious Blood, which is something we've got a fair amount of information on. Most of our documentation is physical. It comes from looking at the interior of the building, at the building itself, at its altar, at the interior decoration, at the statue. So we'll look at that. And then we'll talk about what the art says about the history of the place. And what it says, like I said, I think there's two things. One is about something that historians need to pick up on, and something I hope that the community can pick up on. So next. Okay, one of the roots of Most Precious Blood is at the Church of the Transfiguration at 29 Mott Street, which is basically around the corner. Historian of the Archdiocese of New York, Father John Talbot Smith, wrote that when the Italians began attending Mass at Transfiguration, Pastor James McGee began searching for Italian-speaking clergy to provide pastoral care for them. People may wonder why that was necessary, as Mass was in Latin, but sermons were in the vernacular. And Mass isn't the only sacrament. Catholics also go to confession, that's in the vernacular. And to be married and to have children baptized require conversations with the clergy. Franciscan Father Vittorio Cesario, writing a history of Most Precious Blood in 1961, found in the Franciscan archives that Archbishop John McCluskey, who had invited the Franciscans into the archdiocese to staff an Irish-Italian congregation, St. Anthony of Padua, on Sullivan Street in 1866, invited them to expand their ministry to the Italians at Transfiguration about 1875. the year that McCluskey became the United States' first cardinal. Okay, next. St. Anthony on Sullivan Street was originally incorporated in 1859. So that's how far back the Italians go, when Presbyterian minister Charles Loring Brace kind of embarrassed the Catholic Church by organizing a ministry for Italians in the Five Points area. And Archbishop John Hughes permitted a transient Italian priest to gather an Italian-speaking congregation. But that incorporation never resulted in a church for two reasons. The Archdiocese of New York lacked Italian-speaking clergy when that priest left. He was transient. There was nobody else who spoke enough Italian, and the Italians lacked the wherewithal to support a church. Inviting the Franciscans was supposed to solve the problem of providing Italian-speaking clergy. The Franciscans were formerly known as the Order of Friars Minor, or OSF, were founded in Italy in 1209. However, by the 19th century, they're having trouble in Italy, where the new national government is separating church and state, and the state was ceasing to support the educational and healthcare and social service institutes that the Franciscans staffed, depriving the Franciscans of needed income. So moving to the United States to staff the Italian-speaking parishes promised to replace some of that income. Addressing the Italians' lack of financial support was more of a more complex problem. And McCluskey settled on inviting bilingual Franciscans into his archdiocese. He didn't go to Italy to get his Franciscans. What happened was Franciscans who had lost property in Italy relocated to Buffalo, New York, where they started a new school, which is now known as St. Bonaventure University. By the time McCluskey contacted them, they were speaking both English and Italian, and they could take care of an English and Italian-speaking parish for him. And that's what McCluskey set up. That's why he named it St. Anthony of Padua. He was looking for a saint who would appeal to both an English-speaking and Italian-speaking congregation. And the Franciscans were the ones who organized the church with an English-speaking congregation sort of in the main part of the church, and a smaller, because there really weren't as many Italian speaking people. Their Italian congregation was a smaller congregation. So they had them in a basement chapel. As the number of Italians increased, they didn't just fill up that chapel and then move to the top church. Instead, they start settling in different parts of the city because they're not all taking the same job. A lot of these people are in construction, and so they're working in different parts of the city, building different things, or they're working on the docks, which means they're up and down on the East River, and they're moving to the Hudson River as the steamships replace the old sailing ships and the Hudson River side begins to grow. So as the number of Italians increased and they settle in these different parts of the city, other pastors adopt the same idea, Italians in the basement chapel. Next slide, please. The basements were very controversial. In historical literature, they're remembered as a kind of insult, and it's difficult to reconstruct the actuality because most of these churches had basement chapels before the Italians got there. They didn't make them for the Italians. They had them set up for their own parishioners because on Sundays and holy days, they needed to have a lot of masses very quickly. They were having them like, every half hour, coming and going. And so they would, the upper church would start at 8, the basement at 8:30, the upper church would go at 9, the basement at 9:30, that kind of thing. On the other hand, the one basement I've been able to be in is St. Patrick's Old Cathedral, which they did start a basement congregation when they got Italian people in their neighborhood. And again, it was in the 1870s, a little later than Transfiguration, a little later than 1875. However, as many of you may know, because you can take a tour of it, St. Patrick's basement is mostly given over to a crypt. There's not much room for a congregation to meet for Mass. The space for Mass is pretty much what you see in this picture, there's the stairs going down, and then there that photo that painting of Christ rising from the tomb is kind of in the way, but that space is pretty much the space for people to sit in. Um, and I don't have a photograph of Transfiguration's basement, although that one had been set up previously as a basement chapel. So it had been used by Transfiguration's congregation before the Italians moved in. But we do have another piece of evidence. So next slide, please, and we'll look at that evidence. This is a letter from Transfiguration's pastor, not Father McGee, but the man who came after him. His name is Thomas Lynch, and he succeeded Father McGee as pastor. And he inherited the Italians and their basement chapel and the Franciscans, and he he kept up a steady correspondence with the Archbishop, letting him know every little thing that went wrong with the Italians. This is just one of those letters. The letter starts on kind of the right-hand side of the page where you can see the letter head, Roman Catholic Church of the Transfiguration Rectory, 29 Mott Street, New York, August 10th, 1892, Most Reverend Michael Augustine Corrigan, Monsignor. In answer to your favor of the 4th of this month, reference to public procession of Italians carrying statues of saints through the streets, I would say that no such procession has ever gone forth from this church. Next slide, please, because this is the way he wrote this letter. It's on another page. Okay, the procession of St. Donatus, which you forbade, was held last Monday with all the sound of a brass band and fireworks in the streets of the 6th and 14th wards of this city. The procession passed the Church of the Transfiguration about 10 o'clock. I'm not sure if that's morning or evening. A priest in cassock and surplice and all 4 altar boys came first, after, and then it goes to the sideways writing on the left-hand side, after the brass band. Then came the statue of Saint Donatus, carried on the shoulders of 4 men. Women and small girls followed with large and small candles, and the men of the society, together with the bringing up the rear. In order to find out whether the procession had come from the Church of the Most Precious Blood, I visited the church after the women, and he's going to go back to the other page, so I don't, oh, you good, you went back after been and found that the procession had just disbanded and the statue had been replaced in its usual place before the altar in that church. One of the Piacenza priests walked in the procession. The whole church was decorated with bunting and tinsel. The Italian girl selling pictures at the door of the church gave me all the necessary information to prove that these priests had disobeyed your order. Sincerely, yours, Thomas Lynch. This is just one of about a half a dozen of these kinds of letters. Every time there's a procession, every time there's anything, Father Lynch is eager to let the Archbishop know that the Italians are up to no good. So I need to let you know something else about Father Lynch. So could you get to the next slide, please? In 1903, after his years at Transfiguration, he got transferred to St. Elizabeth in a somewhat richer, somewhat wealthier, more comfortable neighborhood at 187th Street, way up on the west side. And at that time, the IRT company was digging the tunnel for the subway up there. And at 10 p.m. on the night of Saturday, October 24th, the IRT was tunneling 24 hours a day to try to get the subway built. The tunnel ceiling collapsed and the rocks fell in, and it just trapped a whole bunch of men who had just gone into the tunnel. They had their supper and they were going to bed, go back to work, and they got stuck in the tunnel. And some people escaped. A couple of guys at the end of the little procession that was going into the tunnel to go back to work, able to turn around and run out. And they were able to call for help, and a little group of people came together to try to rescue people. And one of the rescuers was Father Lynch, that came down from his church. At this point, he's in late middle age. Okay, he's in his late 50s at this point, and he still didn't speak Italian. So he got a translator, and the two of them risked their lives crawling in there over and under the debris, talking to, calling out. And when they found somebody, they'd stay with them to get somebody to come by, and so forth. I don't know if that's Saint Elizabeth. I don't think it's Saint Elizabeth of Hungary. It's just Saint Elizabeth, and I think that's been consolidated because this happened a while ago, and the churches have been consolidated since 2013. So it might have like a Saint Elizabeth and Saint something else with it. Anyway, when they reached somebody who could not be saved, and you can see there that somebody had to have their leg amputated on the spot. And then you can see among those attracted to the scene was Father Lynch of St. Elizabeth's Roman Catholic Church. And the reason I matched him up with when he died, he had an obituary that placed him at the right place and so forth. So that I do know this is the correct Father Lynch. There were a number of them, but this is the correct person. And I figured I kind of owed it to him to tell the story whenever I have to tell the other story about him at Transfiguration. So next slide, please, because Most Precious Blood had a second set of roots at the parish of St. Joachim at 22 Roosevelt Street, south of Chatham Square. And if that name and address are unfamiliar, it's because St. Joachim closed in 1957 for Chatham Gardens Apartments, that S-shaped building that's between Columbus Park and Police Plaza, if you're familiar with that neighborhood. And if you're not, it's just a giant apartment building that's kind of between the Police Plaza and Chatham Square, and along kind of I want to say Pearl Street, but there's or Park Street. There's a big street that goes up that way. Anyway, this watercolor and the building is that little red building, and the little campanile next to it dates from 1901. Okay, next slide. St. Joachim's is founded in 1889 by clergy sent from Italy by Bishop Giovanni Battista Scalabrini of Piacenza. So these are the Piacenzans that Father Lynch was complaining about in his letter to Archbishop Corrigan. Nowadays, they're known as Scalabrinians. The Scalabrinians regarded basement congregations as transitional at best. For them, the gold standard was Italian parishes, staffed by Italian priests, ideally by Scalabrinians, who understood the Italian language and culture and its regional variations. Next slide, please. The Scalabrinians had an unlikely and a temporary ally in Archbishop Michael Augustine Corrigan. Archbishop Corrigan was born to Irish immigrant parents in Newark, New Jersey in 1839. He was an early vocation in the priesthood, and he was very young, still the youngest person in the United States to become a Catholic bishop when he became Bishop of Newark in 1873. In 1880, when it became apparent that Cardinal McCluskey's health was declining, Bishop Corrigan of Newark was transferred to New York and became what's called a coadjutor bishop, which means that he had as much power as Cardinal McCluskey was willing to give him, which turned out to be considerable because Cardinal McCluskey he had malaria and he wasn't in good health, and he may have also had Parkinson's disease, but he was not in good health. And when he died in 1884 or 1883, Cardinal Corrigan becomes bishop automatically, replaces him automatically. Anyway, Corrigan, next slide, please. Corrigan has at least 2 book-length biographies. The one with the blue cover, I just don't own a copy of it, and it really doesn't look like that at all. It's maroon. I do own the other one, the Corrigan and the Italian immigrants, and he's also sort of the star of a very important article by Henry Brown on the Italian problem in the American Catholic Church from like 1880 to 1900. And all of those things make clear that he agreed with his clergy that the Italian immigrants weren't particularly, good at Catholicism. They did show up at churches, but they weren't attending regularly. They weren't contributing to the churches. They weren't putting money in the basket. They weren't they didn't seem to join the priesthood. They didn't send their daughters into becoming sisters. They didn't show up for holy days. They didn't seem to be doing any of the things that Irish Catholics did. And they didn't seem to think they should be doing any of these things. However, unlike his parish priests, who thought that parishes were like a reward for good behavior, Archbishop Corrigan agreed with Bishop Scalabrini that they were a way to get the desired behavior. If the Italians had their own parishes and their own priests, they might do all those things that we wanted them to do. So if we can get to the next slide, we'll see the next person. Accordingly, Archbishop Corrigan authorized this man, Scalabrini Father Felice Morelli, to turn Transfiguration's basement congregation into the parish of Most Precious Blood. And it turned out that even before clergy who understood their Italian parishioners, parishes needed clergy who understood American law and finance. Father Morelli came to New York in November 1888. And for those of you who are wondering, have I heard of this man before? Yes, you have. In March of 1889, he became forever famous as the priest who failed to provide a convent for the newly arrived Mother Frances Cabrini and her missionaries of the Sacred Heart. He has a little role in that movie, although he wasn't quite as out of it as the movie makes him appear to be. And he got no better at practical matters by 1892, when Archbishop Corrigan put him in charge of Most Precious Blood. By 1893, which has to be some kind of land speed record, he had Most Precious Blood in bankruptcy court. And it has to be some kind of land speed record because no other Catholic church had been in bankruptcy court in the Archdiocese of New York in Archbishop Corrigan's memory. Anyway, Archbishop Corrigan remarkably continued to believe the Italians should have their own parishes, but he stopped believing that Scalabrinians should have their own parishes. In January of 1894, the Franciscans approached Corrigan about purchasing Most Precious Blood from the bankruptcy court and restarting the parish, and Corrigan supported the Franciscans' decision. So if we get the next slide, we can see this is way more than was built at the time. Father Morelli had only gotten as far as the basement when he not only ran out of money, but he overspent already. He had gone into debt on the basement and could not pay that debt, and that's how he ended up in bankruptcy court. Anyway, the Franciscans, though, built and decorated, so we're going to move to the tour part of this now. The Franciscans built and decorated Most Precious Blood as quickly as their budget allowed. In 1894, the Franciscans reopened the basement chapel that was all Father Morelli had been able to finish. And that same year, they hired a German-American architectural firm, William Schickel and Company, which had experience building churches and institutions for German-American Catholics, to build the upper church. And this is what they got. The next year, 1895, William Schickel and Company changed its name to Schickel and Dittmers, but it held on to Most Precious Blood's commission, and it finished the church in 1904. So if we can get the next slide, we'll see some detail here. The Franciscans constructed this. So how did they get the money when Father Morelli was not so good at it? They constructed it by collecting, they'd been in the neighborhood for many, many years, so they could rely a little bit on more of the contributions from people in the neighborhood. They'd been at Sullivan Street for many years. They were able to tap things a little bit better than Father Morelli could. And also they knew the prices of things. They weren't overpaying for things, which was another one of Father Morelli's problems. So anyway, but they were also, they put everything into one general fund. So it's not like the staircase is given in so-and-so's memory, but there's one exception to that. There was one person who gave some specific gifts, and in return, his gifts are reflected in the facade of the building. And so we have some detailed here I want to show you. And here it is. The donor was Carlo, or Charles Bacigalupo, born with the name Celestine Bacigalupo in Genoa. He emigrated to New York around 1870. During his funeral, he was eulogized as having risen from bootblack to business leader, but it seems likely that, like many others in this story, he had some training in the funeral business in Italy, but couldn't secure a foothold in that business. Italy had more funeral directors than it could find work for, and so he left to try his fortune in the United States. And sure enough, there were plenty of Italians who needed his services here, and he created some security for himself, not just by working as a funeral director, but by getting a job as Most Precious Blood's sexton, a facilities manager with specialized knowledge of how to set up for different kinds of masses. He also, took care of the sacristy, took care of the vestments and the items needed for mass and so forth. And he worked hard to promote his business. He also ran the funeral business, as you can see here. This is a bas relief. It's an image of the Most Precious Blood, the chalice with the heart of Jesus there on the top. So the precious blood goes into the chalice there, and you can see there also some grapes, so that you can get the whole idea of wine becoming the precious blood that's used at the Eucharist, that's shared at Mass, and the Catholic belief that that is what Mass is being able to share the blood that was spilt at the crucifixion. And underneath it, though, we also have Mr. Bacigalupo's name, that he is the church sexton, that he is the undertaker, and where you can get a hold of him when you need a funeral. So if we can see the other bas relief, this is on one side. The way the front of the church works is there's a staircase, and then this picture is on one side of the staircase, and on the other side of the staircase, if we can get the other picture, there it is. We have another picture, a very, very different kind of picture, but you can see Mr. Bacigalupo's little name, and his addresses are underneath. I just didn't manage to catch it there, but it's a somewhat different picture, but it's sort of the same, well, it's not the same ballpark. The first one speaks to the church. The first one is, this is the church of the Most Precious Blood. Here's the heart of Jesus, here's the chalice, here's the grapes, here's the idea that the wine becomes the blood of Christ, and so forth. But this is Mr. Bacigalupo's calling card, because here's St. Joseph, the patron of a happy death. That's him in the middle there. He's on his deathbed. This is the sort of the tradition in the Catholic Church, that he died before Jesus began his public ministry, when Jesus was still at home to witness that death, and indeed, as you can see, to comfort him during that death. Jesus is right there, and in fact, Joseph is leaning back against Jesus, and the two of them are sharing a final conversation, and Mary is holding his hand on the other side, a little bit more distant, and even further back is an angel waiting, I guess, waiting for the final moment, so to take him up to heaven. And the clouds are opening, and the sun is getting ready to show the way, and so forth. But this is kind of like what the undertaker is all about. Getting when you have passed away, we will make sure that you have a nice, dignified funeral, and that you'll be everything will will work out nicely for you. So there you go. Um, okay, so let's take another look at another thing, because there's one other detail about Mr. Bacigalupo, excuse me, Mr. Bacigalupo, that I think would be good for your audience. So next slide, please. Um, this comes from the late Father Charles Zanoni, whom some of you may remember from Our Lady of Pompeii. Mr. Bacigalupo had a daughter, Caroline, which is the feminine of Charles, whom he taught the undertaker's business to. And Caroline married Giovanni Battista Perazzo, who learned the funeral business from his wife and father-in-law. And Giovanni Battista and Caroline Perazzo opened their business at 199 Bleecker Street in Greenwich Village. This photo was damaged by someone who was trying to make the inscription more legible, but in English it reads, "To my dear friend, Father Damo, August 1926. So Father Giovanni Perazzo became sort of the undertaker of choice at Our Lady of Pompeii, the way that Charles Bacigalupo was the undertaker of choice at Most Precious Blood. Okay, let's go back to Most Precious Blood in the next slide, and we'll see another person of interest at Most Precious Blood. And once Most Precious Blood's church is completed, once the outside is completed, it's time to put things inside. And the Franciscans begin to order the furnishings needed, altars, pulpits, things like that. And they might not have been able to find an Italian architect, but they could find a goods importer. This is Domenico Borgia. Domenico Borgia was born in Italy. His family had worked in marble in Italy and had, again, kind of maxed out on what they could do in Messina, which is where they were from, Messina, Sicily. And so he and his father came to the United States, and he did a stint in an American marble business, learn the business here, learn how things worked in the United States, and then went into the marble business here and became a marble importer. And within a few years, all of his brothers and the men of the family, his mother seems to have died before he left. And that we think what happened is it kind of like, okay, the mother died, the wife of the father of the family died. It kind of like left a like, the heart of the family's gone. What else are we going to do? Okay, we're going to redo things. We're going to come to the United States and open a new chapter in our lives, personally and professionally. And over time, the brothers all come here. They have different jobs within the business as salesmen, as specialists in ordering different kinds of marble and doing different kinds of things. And he was the person from whom Most Precious Blood ordered its altar, which is not the altar next door to his picture. That altar is an altar that you can see at St. Patrick's Cathedral. It's the one for Jean-Baptiste de La Salle. And it's the picture that he used as his calling card, kind of like, you want to see my work, here's my work. As a way of sort of saying that he worked much more broadly than just within the Italian community, which is a very interesting sort of thing, because there were ways in which people, when they were thinking of Italian Catholicism, there's this phrase, Italian problem, like they didn't go to church, they didn't observe the holy days, they didn't put money in the basket, they didn't join the priesthood, they didn't do this, they didn't do that. On the other hand, they seem to be great at church decoration. And, it's something that really hasn't been explored as much yet as it probably should be. Let's take a look at the altar he did give to Most Precious Blood. That's the next slide. And there it is. Here's the altar that he did get, which he got from Carrara, Italy. It is a Carrara marble altar. Let's take a look at a couple of the details on it. It doesn't look very big because it fits on what looks like kind of a phone picture, but it is so heavy that when the Borgia people installed it, because they did the installation as well as, getting this thing from Italy for you, they had to put a column in the basement of the church under the altar to make sure that it didn't go through the floor on them. It is Carrara marble. There's some other marbles in there to give you that little picture of the lamb with the little cross and flag thing. There's some other marbles. You can see the different colors in the altar to make the little tiny columns and things like that, and kind of the decorations. But look at the top. There's the kind of little dome, little top picture with a fairly complex set of statues up there, a crucifixion scene there, the Christ on the cross, and on one side the Blessed Mother. The one it might be a little hard to get the details. She's got her arms kind of down, if you will, her arms kind of down, her hands are together but folded down. Saint John is the one with his hands more up, as if he were praying with his hands up, and an angel with excuse me, no, that's Mary Magdalene. Actually, it could be an angel. They swap back and forth, but that one's Mary Magdalene at the base of the cross. And it's interesting because you can see there's a kind of triptych behind him. We'll get to that in later. We'll get to the pictures in just a moment. But that there's the altar that they put in there. And let's see here. It came with, next slide, please, because it came with some other things. The altar came with some other things, which I don't have. This is the altar in kind of its situation. It came with this altar rail, which is still in place. It came with a baptismal font, which is now off to one side. But may not have always been off to that one side. The Vatican II introduced some new norms for baptismal fonts, and it came with a birdcage or a tree house kind of pulpit, which was the kind of thing they would use in the days before electricity and before they had a way of making of electric sound, when they had to rely on natural forces to get the sound to go. And they would basically just put the preacher up above the crowd and use a sounding board to get the sound to go down towards the people. Okay, get the next slide, please, and we'll start taking a look at the pictures that were put in there. They were put in by this man. His name is Donatus Bongiorno, and like Borgia and like Bacigalupo, he was born, Bacigalupo was actually born in a fairly big town because he seems to have been from Genoa, from the town of Genoa. Borgia was from a smaller town outside Messina, and Bongiorno was from a small town outside of Naples, from Salafra, in the hills to the east of Naples. And the same thing, he wanted to be an artist, and he was trained to be an artist in Naples, but Italy had like more artists than it knew what to do with. So he comes to the United States, which does not have enough artists, believe it or not, has like churches waiting to be built and decorated, things waiting to be done. So let's take a look at what he does. Because in 1914, if we can look at the next slide, Father Romano Simoni, a pastor of Precious Blood, hires Donatus Bongiorno to paint Most Precious Blood's interior, and he starts producing all kinds of things. The centerpiece is the context he provides for the crucifixion, okay? And it's a kind of a two-piece context. Some of it is like an abstract thought context. The pictures on the two sides are not, these people aren't at the crucifixion, okay? Only the people at the up here at the crucifixion are at the crucifixion. The people on my left, the people above the American flag, that's a picture of the adolescent Jesus in the temple teaching the elders. The elders are on the kind of to the right, and Joseph and Mary are entering on the left. They have just found Jesus in the temple. Some of you may know that's one of the mysteries of the Rosary, one of the joyful mysteries of the Rosary is finding Jesus in the temple, and it's one of the gospel stories. Anyway, I think Bongiorno put it there because it's those elders who are going to intervene with the Romans and ask the Romans to like do something about him, do something about that adult Jesus, get him out of our hair, get him out of, crucify him, do something, and he'll be let off. So it's sort of a way of saying that in spite of all that teaching, they don't seem to have absorbed very much, those elders. Anyway, on the other side is an even better one because it's the woman taken in adultery on the side above the papal flag. That center person, that's Christ. He's wearing a red sash there. That's Christ. And next to him, her back is slightly arched backwards. She's sort of trying to get away from the scene, is the woman taken in adultery, and sort of on the other side to the left are the men, that Christ is telling them, the person without sin should throw the first stone. And the whole thing is kind of a commentary because, Christ is like, this is how we should treat people. And of course, the crucifixion is like right over there. So it's like a commentary on what's going to happen. Directly behind the crucifixion scene is something that is much more, much a different kind of context, an actual physical context. Like that, what it did was take that crucifixion scene and provide literal background for it. Turn that top of the altar into the hill of Golgotha overlooking Jerusalem, and putting in the biblical, sky darkening, like it says in the Gospel of Matthew, and the storm that is brewing, as the crucifixion proceeds in that afternoon. However, there was a problem to that I want to show you, and that is that no one really knows what Jerusalem looked like in Jesus' day, I'm afraid. The Romans razed it, destroyed it in 70 AD, and nobody knows what it looked like. We have very few details as to what it looked like. So how does Bongiorno show people what Jerusalem looks like? Let's look at the next slide. There in the corner is the Dome of the Rock. This was actually completed in 691 AD, and it's of course a Muslim building. It is a sign, is the place that honors where Muhammad left the earth. It is not something that would have been in Jerusalem at the time of Christ. But nothing, we have no idea what Jerusalem at the time of Christ looked like. So, but Bongiorno simply puts it in because he simply got to put his viewers in Jerusalem somehow. And, they think that Jerusalem looks like this because this is what their Jerusalem looks like. So he just put it in. But I think he also put it in for another reason. And it's because it honors the Franciscans. In 1219, Francis and a companion went to Egypt to try to negotiate a peace with the Sultan of Egypt over the Fifth Crusade. And they did manage to get a month-long ceasefire. I don't think they did get anything else. They got a month-long ceasefire, which was pretty good considering how difficult some of these things could be. And in 1342, Pope Clement VI honored the Franciscans with custody over the Christian holy places in Jerusalem. And so they are the Franciscans are the caretakers of the birthplace of Christ and of the place where Christ was crucified and the place where the Last Supper is held and all of the other places that are, you go to visit when you go to visit the Holy Land. So this was sort of a way of saying this is a Franciscan church as well. So there you go. Okay, let's take a look at some of his other things really quickly because we've got other things to look at, and it's getting, my goodness, this is quite the evening. And the sides of the walls have murals of Saint Francis. This is Saint Francis receiving the stigmata. And on the other side, if we can take a look at the other side of the walls quickly, Saint Anthony, the other very famous Franciscan. This is an allusion to Saint Anthony's bread, which some of you may be familiar with on the distribution of bread. I want to take a look at the next slide before I move on. Because I just want to say one other thing. I wanted to just finish up the picture part of this by sort of putting it in, like reminding you where we are historically. Buongiorno did those paintings between 1914 and 1917. And at the same time, Alfred Stieglitz is taking the pictures of Georgia O'Keeffe that some of you are familiar with. And this was a particularly fun juxtaposition because they're sort of her hands in both Stieglitz's picture of O'Keeffe and Buongiorno's picture. That's part of one of Buongiorno's murals, the Christ stepping out of his tomb there and extending one hand, and I just enjoyed that. And in the middle is a picture from Robert Henry, where he's got a little model there that's Henry Sylvester, and he's working his ideas of painting with this model. And Buongiorno, of course, doesn't have a model. But he's also not really like an imaginative painter. It's something that it's a commission. Everyone agrees this is what we should be doing. It's a kind of a community piece of work, not the kind of artistic work that is going on in the village, but it's a kind of artistic work for a community. And I just realized that what the timing on this is like. But I do want to, I'll try and move this as quickly as I can. So let me take a look at the next slide, and I'll move this as quickly as I can. There are, of course, stained glass windows in the Most Precious Blood. I don't have to say much about the art of them. They're there though because of the people involved, and you can see here that this one is another reminder of Mr. Bacigalupo. This time it was not him. He did not put this up. Mrs. Bacigalupo did. Charles Bacigalupo died in 1908, and his wife put this up in his memory. She put up the picture. She got to choose the picture, and she chose his patron saint, who is Charles Borromeo. That's the person in the picture. The photograph next to it is what Mr. Bacigalupo actually looked like. So that's what that one is. But there's another kind of art that I want to show. So we will go to that art. But before we do, there is one slide that's going to go in between that I need to say something about. Because when I was doing this research, there's a lot of people like Mr. Bacigalupo and Borgia and Buongiorno that were attendees at the parish, that were members of the parish, that were getting funerals that got mentioned in the newspaper, and not because they died like in some unusual way or because they were scandalous or because of something odd, but because they were important people in the neighborhood, because which is very interesting. There's a kind of an image that this was a very economically difficult neighborhood, and it was. There's no denying that most of these people moved on very quickly, but there's also this layer of people who were entrepreneurs in the neighborhood, who had some kind of profession that kept them in the neighborhood, who did something, were pillars of the neighborhood in one way or another, and whose lives were contributing to the neighborhood and sort of change our picture of it in some way. Okay, let's take a quick look at some statues here. This place has got a great many statues. This one is one of the oldest there. It is a statue of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and you'll see something that's interesting about it. Take a good look at this statue real quick, but let's take a look at the next picture. And you will see this is the more famous statue of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, the one in East Harlem, the one that is this feast day every July, and it's the more standard picture. Our Lady just sort of upright. She's got the baby on her hip, sort of steadied by her arm. And then look at the one at Most Precious Blood, where Our Lady is sort of like trying to rescue the baby from all those cherubim. It's a very energetic little picture there. Very, and it's the imagination on some of these statues is worth thinking about. Okay, let's take a look at another thing here. This is John Sloane's picture of a Italian procession. It was a picture he started in 1913 and finished about 1921. So this was a picture that was of common sight in he worked in the village. This is a picture that was a common sight, and I think it was probably something that he saw along 6th Avenue, because there's a little bit of the L in the background. And you can see that it's a little bit like what Father Lynch described, with men with the brass band and the saint, this time not a statue on men's shoulders, but a banner being carried, but all the women with girls with the candles, and on the side a man who's hoping to sell people some treats. So it's a little bit of a festive occasion, and an occasion for some to indulge, as well as to have a spiritual event as well. The reason I want you to kind of look and focus on that picture is that we tend to think of it, okay, important historical picture. Okay, let's move along and take a look at some slides here. Okay, and there are books on this subject if you're interested in these books. Bob Orsi's is the classic, The Madonna of 115th Street on Our Lady of East Harlem, and The Lifeblood of the Parish, which is the most recent one on the St. Paulino de Nola celebration in Brooklyn, and Joseph Shora's Built with Faith, which is actually sort of more on people's own home devotions, and they give you some wonderful ideas for your Christmas lighting. But all of them, a lot of this sort of stuff, it works with the idea that there's a lot of history behind this, and that a lot of what these people are doing is some kind of historical event, some kind of like maintaining some kind of history that goes back a long way, or something like that. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay. This one, this is one of Most Precious Bloods. Again, older statues. It is a Pietà, and it's an interesting Pietà. The statue of Mary with Christ on her lap. And you'll see how interesting it is if you take a look at the next statue, next slide, because there's the one you're familiar with. There's the Mary and Jesus that you're familiar with, because that's the one Michelangelo did. And you can see that, one, Michelangelo doesn't have any color on his, and there's a reason for that. There's two reasons for it. One, he doesn't need it. This is Carrara marble. It can stand on its own. The one at Most Precious Blood is made out of plaster. It could be white plaster. You can paint them white, but it has to have some kind of covering. It just can't stand by itself. It has to have something on it. But Michelangelo, it's also like purity. It's also like, this is a pure and acceptable sacrifice. And over at Most Precious Blood, this is an historic event. This is a drama. This is something that's going on in real life. And you can get that reinforced. It's a little hard to see in the picture, but if you've ever seen the Pietà, Michelangelo's Pietà for real, one of the striking things is that Christ's body is as perfect as his sacrifice. I mean, it is a wonderful piece of carving. And this one over here at Most Precious Blood, this person has suffered a difficult death. Something has happened. And going back to Michelangelo, look at the Blessed Mother. Look at her her head is bowed, her eyes are closed or down, her eyes are down, her mouth is closed. She is accepting what has happened. She's waiting for accepting of God's will. Look at this mother over here. She's looking up and down. She's still got her head up. She's looking up and down. She's looking around. She's looking for signs of life here. Something, this cannot have, we're not done yet, maybe. Her mouth is still open. She's still waiting. She might say something. If she thinks that her son could talk, she will talk back. This is something that's still going on. It's really a different aesthetic. Anyway, but more than the aesthetic, there's something else going on here. And I want to show it to you. Let's look at another statue. This is the most famous one because Most Precious Blood is the home of the San Gennaro Festival. This is San Gennaro. He came in 1926. One of the most interesting things is there's no one, everybody else, all the other statues have like a back history. You can usually find something before they come and before they get celebrated. Not this one, not San Gennaro. He just kind of pops up in 1926 and and he becomes, excuse me a second. So I haven't quite finished up yet figuring out what's going on with him. But there is definitely a story here. And I'll show you why, because we'll just look at the next statue really briefly. This one here, this is also San Gennaro, but there's a label on the back. It is a gift from the city of Naples in 1948 to thank the United States for its help in World War II, to liberating Naples in World War II. Now, of all the places to give that gift, it ended up at the San Gennaro Festival. There's a story somewhere. Excuse me. So, excuse me, can we go to the next slide? And this is St. Joseph. St. Joseph is not here because it's got devotees like San Gennaro, like somebody who brings him, or that Pietà, who does have like a group of people that are devotees of that Pietà. But I wanted to mention this St. Joseph because he appears in the writings of Dorothy Day. She mentions coming to this church when they had started their house of hospitality on Mott Street, and they were having trouble paying their bills. And she described it as a prayer picket, like a labor, like when you like labor picketers. They would come and they'd pray in turns. Someone would always be kneeling in front of the statue praying that their bills would get paid. Anyway, next slide, please. This is Saint Anthony. We do have a picture of him in the church, but I chose these ones because they were taken in 1971 by a photographer named T.J. Marino. Excuse me. And some of you may recognize the setting on Mulberry Street, the book company behind the picture on the left, and the center picture. Saint Anthony doesn't really have devotees. He's not like a town. He doesn't have like a town from Italy that, like San Gennaro is the patron of Naples, and that's why he's got all these devotees who celebrate him every September. St. Anthony doesn't have some town that remembers him that way. A lot of people are devoted to him, but not from some town. I think one of the things, though, in the 1970s was that he became a kind of a like Italian American hero during the ethnic revival. And I think that's one of the reasons he got those pictures there in the 1970s. Can we get the next slide, please? This is the current one. We have a Vietnamese congregation now, and so we have Our Lady of Lavang That's the current, sort of the most recent statue to have joined the parish. So I did want to include that picture so that you could see it. But there's two more statues that have joined recently that I want to show you, and we'll close off with this because that'll bring us to the thing that I wanted to say, to think about, and finish off with. If I can get the next slide. Okay. Goodness. Okay. What happened? Okay. Let me just back up just 1 minute and explain what's going on here. In 2013, the Archdiocese of New York recombined its 312 parishes. And in some ways, the idea was to make sure that every parish would have clergy who could take care of it. When it came to Most Precious Blood, though, there were a couple of issues. One of the issues was that it might have made sense to make Transfiguration the neighborhood parish. This is Transfiguration on Mott Street. But Transfiguration already kind of had its hands full, and it already has Mass in English and 3 kinds of Chinese: Mandarin, Cantonese, Fujianese. Even before you get to kind of like tense relations between Vietnamese and Chinese, Transfiguration is so busy with the Chinese community, it's going to have trouble absorbing the Vietnamese community. So it kind of made sense to keep Most Precious Blood available for the Vietnamese community, small as the Vietnamese community is, and to say, okay, Our Lady of Lavang goes there, the Vietnamese community goes there. They have one Mass. It's a small community, but just, it's worth it to have that church there for them. So Most Precious Blood is in some ways has an ethnic succession from Italian to Vietnamese. So that's one thing that it has. But it's also got something else. So let's take a look at the next slide. And the something else is that the diocese had already lost St. Joachim. St. Joachim's was closed in 1957 because of urban renewal. But the diocese also closed in 2013. It closed St. Joseph's, which was the last Italian church in the neighborhood. And that's the one on the right-hand side. And that really, I think they thought, well, Little Italy is down to a bunch of restaurants. What's really there? And they were about to find out, because they closed St. Joseph's, and all of a sudden it turns out there's people. And now they all show up at Most Precious Blood because that's what's left for the Italians. Transfiguration has got, like I said, an English Mass and 3 Chinese Masses. St. James, that also closed. There's what's left. Okay, let's look at the next slide. It's the one in the middle. Okay, look at this one. This is really interesting because 4 of those statues are from the Met. The one in the middle is St. Rocco, which is from Most Precious Blood. But look at what it looks like. Look at that's a good wood statue, really good wood, really good paint job, really nice work. It could be museum quality. He could be living in a museum, but his devotees aren't ready for him to live in a museum. St. Rocco, let's look at the next slide. St. Rocco, this is a picture of Jacob Riis. Jacob Riis took this picture before St. Rocco got here. His devotees were just using that little square picture of him in there to have a celebration. This was taken a little before 1889, before that statue got here. That's when the statue got here. Statue's been here since 1889. And when the statue got here, the first time we see it connected to a church is 1891. And then it kind of bounced around the Lower East Side. It's been in several different churches. And it ended up at St. Joseph's in 1925. And it stayed there until 2015. Church was closed in 2013, but it took a while to really move everything out. But in 2015, they moved over to Most Precious Blood, and they've been there ever since. And they do their annual mass every August. The whole group shows up, and they're still doing, their annual feast day celebration. Let's take a look at the next slide there. So this is Saint Vincent Martyr, and his devotees have a terribly interesting story. They're from a place called Krakow, which is in Basilicata, which is in like the instep of Italy, the lower part of Italy. The town itself is a ghost town. You can rent it for movies and destination weddings. It's no one lives there anymore. It began to empty out in the 19th century. It was so unproductive, the soil became unproductive, and the people began to leave, and they were so it was I mean they were so behind everything that they came to New York. And you know how, here, let's take a look at the next slide, because you'll be familiar with it. Some of you are familiar with this. This is Jacob Riis's picture of an Italian rag picker. And you know how people say in the 19th century all those immigrants could come here and find jobs. Not the Crocesi. They came here and they were not familiar with the industrial world. They had to make work. They made work. They made work in rag picking. They made work by going around and cleaning up, finding cloth in on the street before the sanitation people got there, or by going to the dump, which meant the dock, where the sanitation people brought their stuff, their carts, and picking up cloth. That's what's in those bundles behind this woman. And you can see the big bins where she's going to wash her cloth. And she might take it to a paper manufacturer, but it's more likely that she's going to give it to one of her compatriots, and he's going to be her middleman, and he's going to, for a cut of the take, he's going to take it to a paper manufacturer. And what happened was the Crocesi developed, Crocesi means someone from Krakow, he's going to develop a business that way. And these people developed themselves into business people that way. They developed themselves into paper salespeople and paper collectors and paper salespeople and eventually paper manufacturers. And they continued to work this way. And the funny thing, I mean, they continued to operate as a kind of little community this way. And St. Vincent Martyr was kind of something on which their community gathered around. They continued to work, to meet once a year in honor of St. Vincent Martyr, and to maintain a newsletter with him, and to keep up with each other around him. So this was something that they put together that way. Okay, let me wrap this up. You show me the next slide, I think. Thank you very much. The bouquet of flowers for everybody, because this has gone on a little longer than I expected. I practiced and practiced to try to get this down, but as you can tell, I've got a bit of a cold, and talking is a little unpredictable for me. So thank you so very much for your patience. I'm going to show another slide, or Mr. Roca is going to show us another slide. It has a QR code on it. This is not the village's preservation's QR code. So if you want to support village preservation, you have to go back to them and their QR code. This one will take you to Amazon if you want to buy a book with more pictures of all the beautiful things in the church and more stories of all the people connected with the church. Some of them, one of them by me, but some of them by Paul Moses, who some of you may know from writing several books about New York, and other people who work in art and architecture. But the two things that I learned about this that I want to follow up on. One, a lot of times when you talk about a church like this, people tend to think of it as kind of unidimensional, that there's a lot of poor people, they're unskilled workers, they're very poor, they come here as like, beginning immigrants, and then they kind of move through this neighborhood to something better. And yeah, they definitely must have moved through this neighborhood because it's Chinatown now. But that was not the whole story. Some of them were talented enough and skilled enough to decorate this church, to buy the furnishings and paint the paintings and do things like that. And some of them were contributors to it for their families for a couple of generations. And there's more stories that I didn't have time to tell you. And I think we need to kind of understand that there's a complexity there. There's more to this community than sort of this unidimensional thing, and we need to really work on that. And the other thing is that it is people look at the San Gennaro Festival and it's like, okay, there's the San Gennaro Festival, and that is the tip of the iceberg. There is the St. Rocco people have been here since 1889. The St. Vincent Martyr people are a large number of people. Now the Vietnamese are imitating them is perhaps not a they're not just imitating them. This is something people seem to do. You know, they have a patron saint, they gather around this, it's part of a community of things. This is not something that just disappears somehow. This is something that has to be planned for and has to be kind of incorporated into the way a community works. So that's what I want to say. I'm sorry if there's time for questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. If not, there was my email.
I think we still have time for questions. That was
If not, I'm sorry if I made them all disappear. So,
no, this was an absolutely fascinating presentation. I think it really makes you, when you visit a church or look at any kind of community in New York, to really keep your eyes peeled and open, because how many connections and how much of a story there is behind everything. So no, this was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. I did see one question early on in the presentation when you were reading the letter from Father Lynch about the procession there, and really kind of how the church viewed these Italian immigrants. Was it a particular form of prejudice for these group of Italians in general, or was it from, where these Italians were coming from within Italy? Yet how much of it was a prejudice?
that's a good question. Thank you. That's a good question. Um, in Let me take care of the like where in Italy. Um, it's because this is another thing that's kind of interesting. The processions are often identified with southern Italy. San Gennaro, for example, is the patron saint of Naples, and Naples is in southern Italy. Um, St. Rocco is a patron saint of Potenza, and Potenza is in southern Italy. St. Vincent Martyr is a patron saint of Krakow, which is in Basilicata, so on and so forth. Um, but the Scalabrini fathers were from like it's the border between Emilia Romagna and Lombardy, and yet they were apparently happy enough to lead the procession. If you people want a procession, fine. Father Damo, people who are used to Pompeii, apparently did not have processions. He did not like having them. He was a little. He thought that it wasn't a good look for the church, if you wish. But what was interesting was he didn't. The look wasn't aimed at the neighbors. It was aimed at the kids. He thought that the kids would be sort of driven away by the idea that their Italian parents were practicing something that was like too Italian, um, and that we should be doing something maybe more in keeping with American things. So so it's a little bit like everybody's got their own little thing, if you will. So it's a little hard to answer the question for every single person, if you will. Does that help a little bit?
No, absolutely.
Um, because um, in general, the processions are southern, but it's not an absolute.
Gotcha. And a lot of people are commenting on the really the fascinating look at the statues and the artwork and the incredible amount of research you've done to bring us this amazing information. In your research, did you see that these connections in any other churches in the neighborhood and also from any kind of other ethnic churches at the time? Be it Irish Catholic churches, German Catholic churches, the same thing of bringing these artists from a homeland and creating statues that reflect where they were coming from.
Not so much Ireland, which was not allowed to have as much of a tradition, just because of their background. But Germany, yes, Germany had such a tradition that Germany actually is providing for others. So, like I said, Precious Blood ended up with a German architect for its church, and many churches ended up with German stained glass windows. They seem to have had a um, it was funny because Italy has a glass tradition, but they didn't I know one church that I worked with had the Stations of the Cross were done with glass mosaics from Venice, but the stained glass came from Germany. You
That's
know, go figure. so so yeah, people do. I mean, I think people what's interesting to me is that um and I think it really got driven home with that pietà. When I first saw the pietà Most Precious Blood, it's like, wow, look at that, because you're used to the Michelangelo pietà. We have a copy of the Michelangelo pietà at my church, and you think that's what a pietà is supposed to look like. No, people at Precious Blood think this is what a pietà is supposed to look like, and so they would get that one from their home.
amazing.
And so I imagine the same thing would be true of anybody. You want the one like the one from your home. If you're of Byzantine or Orthodox Christian, you want the icon from your home. You want that. So everybody, yeah, there must be a whole business of this. I haven't looked at it that fully, but I imagine there's that is definitely there to look at, and just think of the economic implications. Think of the people being supported and the businesses and so forth being supported by that.
It's amazing. It feels like it with these deep ethnic influences, but it almost becomes uniquely American with the overlap of all the different ethnic groups and the fact that the churches still carry their mission on today to support those new Americans in the Vietnamese and Chinese communities. Absolutely fascinating.
Hmm.
Yeah, would you mind telling us a little bit more about your research because of all these like amazing pictures you showed and newspapers? Where were some of the other places that you went to do your research? Because I mean, I myself am not, very used to doing research related to church history. So it'd be kind of interesting to know what some of your research sources were.
um okay, well, first, again, I got to thank uh Janice Carapellucci and Bill Russo and a number of people who took some of those pictures that you all saw. I mean, I've been in the church. I think there's nothing like actually being in the church, because then you also see like where things are in relation to other things, in the building, and where do you put them and who gets pride of place. And St. Gennaro has his own little room at Most Precious Blood with like half a dozen St. Gennaros, in banner form and bust form and statue form and so forth. And you know, that's very, to see what's there. And like I said, and then it's also interesting. And then, okay, so you look at the statue, you go and kind of like first see what's there and where it is and what it is. And then I ran them through. We're very lucky at Most Precious Blood that they didn't. They just kept everything. They kept lots of stuff in the basement, including things like like here's our statue, the bills for the statue arriving, the bill for the statue. You built the little thing, niche for the statue or what have you, or the and that these statues were often kind of deals with the people. That was the interesting thing. They're not, and that was like St. Rocco. I think some of you may know this, that when a Catholic church closes in the archdiocese moves in, it takes away the stained glass windows and puts them somewhere safe. It takes away the statues and things like if the church is consolidated with another church and becomes like the church of Saint this end of the block and that end of the block, the the statues may be brought together so the two congregations can have their statues together. But if they're not needed, then they all go to this big warehouse in Staten Island, which I live on Staten Island, so I've seen the big warehouse. You can look in the window, and clergy who need something, like it's very common to need a statue of the Blessed Mother, or a statue of Saint Joseph. These are important people to everyone in the church. So the priest can come out here and get a statue for his church. There's other things that you might just need angels to kind of fill up your space or something like that. So uh anyway, so when you're studying this kind of thing, you see where they are and you see what's there. At Most Precious Blood, some of those statues though were put there by people who they're still there, they're still belong to those people. The St. Rocco Society, that's their statue. They will take it away if they if and put it somewhere else if your church closes, because they need to hold their St. Rocco procession every year. So so and in the early years it was they were they were making deals literally with the clergy. St. Rocco gets this niche and we get a panegyric sermon about St. Rocco every year, and mass about St. Rocco every year. And St. Rocco, the society functioned as a kind of insurance operation. The people paid dues, and then if when someone died, because everybody does die, the company would pay for a certain amount towards their funeral, would get their funeral benefit, and the priest would be obliged to hold their funeral mass. And it would have to be a certain level of mass, none of the 6 a.m., low mass type thing, but, sung mass at 10 o'clock for the widow, and everything. So, it was all like to a benefit to help these people. So, in the early days, like I said, if they didn't get, if things didn't seem to be going right, they would go find another church that would help them do what they wanted. So St. Rocco actually moved a couple of times in the early days. So and the records for that are at Precious Blood. Here's the agreement. St. Rocco goes here. He doesn't go there. He goes here. We do the panegyric. We do the mass. We do the funeral, or we don't, whatever the agreement is. You can run churches through newspapers. It helps to, be a little imaginative, because sometimes they leave the most out of Precious Blood. It's just Precious Blood. Yes. um, uh, but some things are missing. Like I said, the San Gennaro, I mean, you try spelling it different ways, you try this, you try that. It really does not get much notice. And now newspapers are coming online in much greater numbers. It used to be like the Times was online because the Times goes back to 1851 and the Times is still publishing. So it kind of controls this operation. But now, even newspapers that have been defunct for a few years, the papers can be made available. And there's something called Catholic Research Resource Alliance, and that's you can get a whole bunch of newspapers through that one. And there's an ethnic a couple of ways to get at ethnic newspapers, although not quite as good. Like I can't like go to one place for the Italian papers and plug in San Gennaro. But or but it's amazing how little I don't know if it didn't exist or it wasn't worth their notice or they just didn't like know how to do this. Um there's a period in the very early times, like about the 1890s, when these things were kind of color, like local color, and then it just sort of drops out. And now it's like I say, now it's you read these and it's they do cover it every year. There's something on the San Gennaro Festival. It's the same something every year. It's always the food and the nostalgia. So, um, but so those are some of the places where you can go to look for information. The archdiocese, of course, maintains records of each church, and religious orders. The Franciscans took care of the of Saint of Precious Blood from until 2014, so they have records of that church.
Mary, a very, very big thank you for this wonderful presentation. We really, really appreciate it. Everyone, the link to purchase the book will be shared in the follow-up email that you'll get over the next few days. And before I let everyone go for the evening, I just want to wish you all a very, very happy and healthy holiday season. We really appreciate you joining us for our programs throughout 2024 and hope you will be joining us again in 2025 for a new batch of programs. But again, Mary, a huge thank you to you. This was absolutely wonderful. And thank you to all of you in our audience. And again, happy holidays and a happy new year. And we will see each other again in 2025. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.